So we've been talking about global conflicts, and I feel duty bound to do a little analysis of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I'm not going to go into a whole thing of it because I think other people can do a better analysis than I can. But one thing that I feel like is not getting brought up by a lot of people that I want to bring up is the fact that over the last, since 1948 with the mass expulsion of Palestinians and the setup of an official Israeli state, Israel has slowly but surely taken the majority of the resources in historic Palestine or Greater Israel, depending on what your perspective is. But those resources, specifically water, Israel controls the majority of the springs, and actually, as the years have gone by in the last decade, they've taken control of even more of them. So, I mean, for supporters of a Palestinian state, I just don't really see that happening. I know that's an unpopular opinion, but it's because, like, no matter what, the resources that Israel currently controls in that region will always make a Palestinian state or any kind of Palestinian entity subordinate to Israel. And at the same time, Israel is always going to be responsible for their own security, for the well-being of the Palestinian people. And this is why I think this conflict is so ridiculous, because I think that both groups of people need each other. Palestinians, having been deprived of their resources by the Israelis over the last 50 years, need the resources of Israel. Whether those resources were ill-gotten or not doesn't really matter. When it comes to feeding hungry children, that should be the priority. But for the Israelis, they need Palestinians because the reality is they just can't, in this day and age, you're not going to be able to kill every single Palestinian, right? The idea that you're going to kill Hamas, which is more of an idea than like an actual organization, like, is just ridiculous. And actually, if you look at the current situation with the Palestinians, they're more radical than they've ever been because the new generation, the millennials and Gen Z people are very political and very hopeless. They're experiencing hopelessness that, that their generation is experiencing all over the world, but at an even more extreme situation because of the oppression that the Israelis have been putting upon them for the last, decades. But basically, like, Israel's security is dependent on it providing a reasonable livelihood to Palestinians, and the Palestinians rely on Israeli resources, which I don't like to call them Israeli resources because obviously, people on the Palestinian side of things would say those are all Palestinian resources that Israelis stole. And while that's totally true, it doesn't change the fact that Israel currently controls those resources. I believe that the only solution is a one-state solution in which Palestinians are granted equal rights and protections under the law as Israeli citizens. I know that's probably an unpopular opinion on both sides, but I just don't really see any other way that the conflict can be resolved. Because once again, like, just think about this, like, a Palestinian state will always be subordinate to an Israeli state because Israel controls the majority of the resources needed for life in historic Palestine. So, you know what I mean? Even if you're pro-Palestinian, like, you're never going to get rid of Israel, right? And as long as Israel's there, there's always going to be that oppressive relationship. And at the same time, if you're pro-Israeli, you're never going to get rid of the Palestinians. They're always going to be there. So you can either integrate with them, like South Africa did with its African population, or you can be destroyed by them because you're just going to continue to be in this insecure state with terrorism. And it's just like deprivation in the inner cities of America, right? Like, when you have these rampant, generationally poor regions, you can't be surprised when people go in and start committing crimes. It's not a surprise. That's what happens when you have, like, generationally deprived regions. And that's why it's so important to, like, equally invest in all your regions if you're a state or an empire or something like that, because that's what prevents conflict. But, yeah, that's my 2 bits on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.